The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Baldwin. I'm the VP of Marketing at Tabs Analytics, and I'd like to welcome you to our second webinar of the 2019 series, Online Grocery, Are We There Yet? In today's webinar, we'll analyze online grocery with a focus on consumables categories and using data collected over the past 6 years to ask some challenging questions about whether online grocery in its current state is a viable business model. We'll elaborate on what issues and barriers it faces, centered around supply and demand, financial, and competitive. Our next webinar will be our 12th annual Vitamins and Minerals Studies Supplement that surveys and shopping patterns and consumers and examine trends on what types of products are being purchased, how frequently, and in what outlets. So be sure to join us for this informative presentation on Wednesday, June 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Please check back at our website at tabsanalytics.com in early May for more sign-up information on our homepage. Presenting today is Dr. Jetta, Executive Chairman and Founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you can submit via the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Okay, thank you, Robert, and thank you for all those attending today and taking time out of your day to sit through the webinar. Try and keep it lively and informative. We use lots of facts, lots of data, and lots of our own research to answer a lot of these questions that we'll be posing today. So the overall topic is online grocery. Are we there yet? There's probably not a whole lot of topics in our industry that are more written about over the last year or two than online grocery. Is it viable? Is it growing? Is it making money? What's Amazon doing? What's Amazon doing versus Walmart? All kinds of variants because there is such a high level of interest. So what I wanted to do is really level set on what are the recent trends in e-com grocery and then make some projections for the future. So as Robert mentioned, is this a viable sector? The way we're going to answer that question is we do these surveys, and we've done this annual grocery study for the last 6 years, and what it asks is what types of products people buy and where do they buy them, and in a couple attitudinal questions. Just note that when I talk grocery, what this isolates on are the top 15 consumables categories. So we're talking soft drinks and water and salty snacks and cookies and candy. Very high volume, high purchase cycle categories that we use as a proxy for the well-being of total grocery. These categories account for 20% of volume. Within just the food sector, they account for over a third. And they're all the mega companies that you know about. So there's Kraft, there's Mondelez, there's Unilever, Pepsi, Coke, etc. We also have then a methodology we call share of mentions that allows us to get the all outlet share projection. So we know that what is Amazon share, what are the share of Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or all these other hard to track channel in a holistic manner. And when we talk about share of mentions, it's a proxy for share of transactions. And so what we do is take how often the people that mention they shop at certain places and certain places regularly, weight those respondents for their intensity of buying these categories, and we come up with an overall estimate on share of mentions. I'm also going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the top 4 retailers in terms of publicly available financial information from Walmart, Target, Kroger, and Costco. So those are the big 4 in the grocery industry, and they are a good insight into e-commerce well-being in general. And then there's a lot of industry publications and studies out there. So we'll bring all 4 of those together today to answer the question of, are we there yet? And so to that question, are we there yet? No, the answer is no. We're not there yet. We'll never get there. Online grocery will never be profitable with the current business model. So I start with the old, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them. And so basically what I'll proceed to do now for the remainder of this webinar is support that thesis. And it's not just going to be a lot of empirical evidence, and it's not just going to be our own research, but it's going to be economic theory. And we're going to look at the current state of their profitability and see where they need to be to have a profitable model. Because what we see now versus say 2 years ago, when there was still a lot of exuberance and hype and, oh, it's growing, it's going to be great. And I remember 2 years ago, I actually had a webinar really, and we put out the word that online grocery was failing because the market share was just so low. And now we're starting to see, after even there was a lot of pushback then, but now there's a realization. I mean, the big thing that really hit home for me is Trader Joe's pulling out of delivery in Manhattan. And everyone that studies online grocery, more than in a passing rate, basically says that, hey, maybe it won't be profitable in many areas, or maybe not even most areas, but certainly in high density urban areas where people have a lot of disposable income, that's where it can be viable. And here's Trader Joe's that is perfectly targeted as their brand for the target consumer in a high density area, and they pulled out. And the reason they gave was just they weren't making any money, they were losing money. But we're starting to see other problems on the demand side. So a recognition in major media that people still aren't buying groceries online, that it's still a very small share. Generally, if you look up what's the market share of online grocery through various industry studies and media publications, they usually put it about 2 to 3%. That's pretty close to our estimate. We're a little bit higher, but again, our methodology differs. So I tend to think that they're actually closer than ours because ours is share of transactions, whereas they're measuring share of dollars. And then not only do you see demand problems, but supply problems. And one of the things that's kind of been a fairly recurring theme are these supply problems, particularly with respect to working conditions in these warehouses. So there was a big expose in the New York Times talking about that, but you can just Google these things and you find that there's a lot of pressure. You can even talk to your local delivery person, look in the back of the UPS truck, and it's total chaos. I mean, there's just such pressure on the supply chain because they really haven't been prepared to handle even the current volumes today, and there still needs to be a long, long way to go because the volumes are relatively light relative to brick and mortar. Again, only say 2 to 3% of dollars and maybe 4 or 5% of transactions. So I think we're all can agree, and certainly the data suggests that e-commerce grocery is growing, but the one issue that we find is there's no scale. And here's, I talked about the share of mentions metric that I talked about, and I've divided it into 2 areas here. So you can see at the top where we have a lot of high share categories like baby and vitamins and cosmetics. Close to 20% of the transactions are on e-commerce, and those are growing. You can see year over year, but look down here, and actually we have a few more studies I've failed to enter, but that are all in the 3 to 4% range. But our grocery study over the last 3 years, even though it's growing, it's still very small. We did personal care in 2017, very small. We did pasta sauce, we did Beval, all in the same area. So what's the common denominator? Well, if you look at the ones that have high penetration in grocery, they tend to be long purchase cycle, higher price point categories. Whereas the short purchase cycle, low price point items aren't doing very well from a share basis, very low. So there's a really big disparity in performance between those 2 sectors. And so here's really where we're talking about. I'm not referring to these sectors like vitamins and cosmetics that are doing reasonably well and actually much better than the grocery sectors. And so let's talk about where people are going. So we've asked for the last 6 years, where do you shop regularly? We ask by channel and sometimes by specific banner. But one thing to note, though, the way we define regularly in our survey is a really low bar, 6 times a year. The average number of transactions across all grocery products is over 40 times a year, almost once a week. For the average banner, say a Kroger or an Albertsons, that average is in the 20 to 25 range, so once every 2 weeks. So 6 is very low, but what we see is that the big, big brick and mortar, Walmart, traditional groceries, still the majority of Americans still go into brick and mortar, the popular brick and mortar. Here's Walmart. Over half the people in our country shop there regularly. And you just wouldn't, if you read the business publications, you'd think everybody shopped at Whole Foods and bought at Amazon, which is not the case at all. So where you do see dips in those two, so where's that going? Well, it's really small format that's growing. You can see dollar that has grown, almost doubled the number of regular buyers, and a lot of it has to do with all the number of stores they're putting up. But we also see growth in CVS. Walgreens has held its own, but has grown over time. Value grocery, primarily Aldi, is growing. Even Rite Aid was showing growth. Here's online. So that is growing as well, but the big thing here is only 1 in 6 people even shop online regularly, 6 or more times a year. That is still way below all of these other platforms. So figure online, has a national footprint, yet only 1 in 6 people shop there regularly. So are we there yet? Just from a demand perspective, no, not even close. And if we want to break down, how's it break out delivery versus pickup? It's deliveries preferred 2 to 1 still. So much more activity on delivery. Both are growing at about the same rate, but it's still delivery, and that has major implications for the future. The fact that there are 2 meaningful supply chains now that have to be supported. So they're fragmenting an already small base. If we then take all those mentions and divide them up and have that share of mentions measures, so we see that 57% of transactions are still large format outlets, 38% in small format, and 5% online. So our share of transactions a bit higher. So you can see those gainers and losers. Traditional grocery is in fact declining. You say, well, is this the death of brick and mortar retail? I mean, it's still number 1. There's clearly some weak players in traditional grocery, but what I can tell you, again, based on publicly available information and our research, is that regional grocers in particular, Publix, Wegmans, HEB, ShopRite, all doing very well. But you can see dollar has grown share. Online has grown share, so from 3.4 to 4.6 value grocery. So the more, though, the declines of traditional grocery are coming more from small format than they are of online. Just always keep in mind, I've mentioned it a few times, I'll reinforce it again, this methodology does not pick up transaction size. So even though 57% of transactions are our estimate of going to large format, we would estimate probably 75 to 80% of actual dollars, because the average transaction size is so much higher in those formats than the small format. So here's that online growth, and we can see, yes, it's meaningful, but it's still way in the back of all these other outlets. So let's talk about that growth. So we divide the growth into those people buying any, those people buying regularly, 6 or more times, and then we create this stated loyalty measure, which takes the ratio of those that buy regularly versus those that buy any. So 17 divided by 38 gets me 44% stated loyalty. So the first thing you noticed here is that the majority of people don't even buy one time. And very high degree of confidence that would project to any type of online grocery, which is a staggering number. Almost everybody in our country shops brick and mortar, but still, after all the hype, discussion, marketing, trial offers, more than half the people still don't buy online. That 1 in 6 number, while it's growing, it's still very, very low relative to all the other platforms. And that stated loyalty at 44%, it's improved, but it's still well short of where it needs to be. So I've been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, online grocery has a major demand problem. And here's why. Where does it need to be to ensure a viable ongoing success? It needs to be up here at 75%. That's where even the worst in class brick and mortar retailers are. And this is a whole channel that can't even get to 75% regular purchase. And you can see that the growth rate is very slow. And what's going to, so I wrote this actually a couple months, actually a month and a half ago, saying there's still a lot of runway for growth because we are still seeing these two factors growing, but there was always this replenishment problem, meaning if 56% of the people aren't coming back next, on a regular basis, it's a high likelihood you're going to lose them, if not forever, then for the near term. And so it puts a really heavy burden on getting new people in. So the replenishment problem is, do you lose people faster than you can bring new people in to be regular shoppers? And my initial estimates said they're going to start facing that in about the next 5 or 6 years. I could be wrong though, because this is what a replenishment problem looks like. I just pulled this yesterday. I saw somebody, actually Bill Bishop, Bricks Meets Clicks, consultancy that studies online issues more closely than we do, but he's tweeted this out. And in the UK, where it is more highly developed than in the US, you can see two things. First of all, just under half the people are shopping online grocery, and that number is down meaningfully since 2016, 4 points. So that's an almost 10% decline in the buyer base. So that's what I talk about as a replenishment problem. They probably had people that tried and fell out faster than the net of people that are coming in. So if we've maxed out at 50 in the UK, or at least that's, these are 2 data points, we need to carry it one further. I think this is a insight into the future, the very near future of what we can expect in the US, because all the major retailers now have an online presence, and we're still at well under 50% of the people buying online. As we split that online purchasing, then just looking at the regular shoppers, how's it divide out by delivery only, pickup only, and then both options? So when these two started, when pickup really started picking up, really revving up and expanding, you could see there were a lot of people in our survey that were using both platforms. They were still trying to decide which one they prefer. So you can see that that number as a proportion to the total is coming down, people buying both. They seem to be trending either toward pickup only or delivery only, but you can see almost over 2 to 1 preference for delivery only, and that's still growing. Pickup only is growing a bit faster. So they're all growing again, but is it big enough to really be worthwhile? So, and still in the aggregate, this pickup only is still very small. We're talking 6% of shoppers are buying their regular. So for context, that would be smaller than a lot of our regional grocery chains, like smaller than, say, a ShopRite or a Publix. And so this is a platform, again, that is trying to get national presence with a buyer base that wouldn't even support Publix. So it's a real big issue going forward on just that whole demand. So as we drill in a little bit more to where they're going online, a couple interesting things. First of all, grocery banners was still seeing a big decline. They actually ticked upward in our latest study in 2018, probably due to renewed focus, a lot of it from Kroger and a couple other banners. Amazon was flat. And so that's, again, kind of that replenishment issue, I would surmise. And here's where they were all this expected synergy between them and Whole Foods. After they acquired Whole Foods, they weren't able to get any extra buyers, and Whole Foods same-store sales actually went down 3%. So it seems like that whole combination fell fairly flat. Walmart hasn't grown as much as we've seen in other sectors. I mean, there's sector growth in all those other ones, baby and vitamins, et cetera, has gone up dramatically. Not so much in food, although they have grown within the e-com competitors. Here's Peapod over here. They've been in business for 20 years. And they have not grown beyond 2%. And they have the potential to get about, I believe the number is 20% of the country. So they're clustered in the Northeast, all the way from DC, all the way up to Boston and Maine. So why this light demand in online grocery? Well, a big part of it is Americans just aren't into online purchasing in general. So remember, we're talking about the whole country, not just our little cultural bubble that the vast majority of people are on this call would fall into. Affluent, professional, educated types. Recall that more than half the people shop at Walmart. 57%. Here we ask the question, I consider myself a heavy online purchaser overall, not just groceries, but overall. And that number has been, 1 in 8, 1 in 9 people the last 4 years we've asked the question. And here's another, everybody thinks organics is hot and it's growing, it's big. I mean, that's again been, it's a niche business. Just like online is, even though the people doing online purchasing, particularly for big ticket items, are buying a lot. And so it accounts for, in aggregate, a lot of volume. The absolute number of people that consider themselves heavy purchasers is pretty low. So that inherently creates a dampener on grocery purchasing, which by its nature requires high level of repeat rate purchasing. Remember, 40 times a year plus that they're going to the grocery store. Okay, so that's the whole demand issue. Let's now turn our attention to the supply issue and the profit issue. So we're going to look at annual reports for those top 4 retailers, and we'll start with the big daddy, Walmart. So look at their revenue. This is all global, so this isn't just US, but they're globally. They went from 486 to 514. They've grown their revenue $30 billion over that time, little over 1% a year. But during that same time, their profits have gone down 5% a year. The big drop is where you can see they bought Jetta.com. They made a major investment. Look at they tanked in 2018, made a comeback, but still 30 billion more in revenue, 5 billion less in profits. And we can lay that almost entirely at the doorstep of their e-commerce investment. So that's Walmart. Target, it's a very similar story. They had their troubles with Target Canada. You can see they dropped quite a bit here. Their profits, went back to where they were, but they were all in the 4.5 to 5.5. Big e-com investment helped turn their business around. Publicly available information, e-com is up 35, 40%. Their profits have not increased. So they were able to grow their volume, revenue by almost 3 billion, flat profits. So again, losing money, compounded annual growth over the last 5 years down. Kroger, big time decline. They're up over 20 billion to 25 billion dollars in revenue. Their profit down almost $1 billion where it was to start just last year. So they made that big investment in robotics and Ocado, and we're going to get technological, and have scale and be all kinds of exotic technological enhancements. Boom, 1.3 billion decline in profits, 6.1% decline in CAGR. So, not paying off. So now we have 3 companies that are demonstrating publicly available information, losing a lot of money from e-commerce. Here's Costco, though, not fitting that profile. So you see really nice gains, 6% a year in revenue, and their profits going up even more. And if you Google about Kroger and e-com, you'll constantly see the haranguing from the investment community that they're slow to get on the e-commerce bandwagon. They have this crazy notion that their shareholders actually want them to make money. Can you imagine that? That's insanity. Why aren't they following with the other sheep and getting into the e-com business? Well, we're going to take a look at why not. So first of all, did you sleep in Econ 101? Well, then go foghorn leghorn on you, say, pay attention, son, because we're going to talk a little economic theory. Do you remember these charts here? Remember where this is called the cost curve. So basically, this is the marginal cost. So as we increase our production, we tend to become less efficient. This is the average variable cost as we go up here. And then the average cost is the combination of fixed costs and variable costs. And here's the concept of scale. We want to come down and have that fixed cost, and the cost per unit keeps coming down. So that's where we aspire to, and to make money, we need to be above this line right here. Okay, so that's where we're aspiring to in this economic framework. And if for short-term profits, my marginal revenue needs to be above my average variable cost, which is right here. So if I'm below here, then that's not a good thing. I'm always unprofitable. My marginal revenue or my price, what pricing is marginal revenue, is below my average variable cost. So keep that in mind. So let's take a look at what's actually happening. So we often hear about brick and mortar being very thin margin, and that in fact absolutely is. But what we need to clarify, though, is on a variable basis, before we consider all the overheads and those fixed costs, they're actually not that unprofitable, 25 to 33%. Costco is a bit less by construction. They have explicitly said they're only going to take 15 to 20 margins on their goods, but where they make money is they're so much more efficient. They have less, stores, they get more volume per store, less employees, less transportation, all the logistics costs. But we're all in a state where per $100 of retail sales, all of these retailers are profitable. And so this is then they're all making, I just saw that, that's not right. That is total. So this is their operating margins. They're at 3 to 5%. I see Target way up at 7% because their margins, because they tend to be higher margin products, household goods, and general merchandise carries very, very high margins. They have a higher percentage of their sales there. So here's the profit structure on this is brick and mortar right here. So pay no heed to this e-com. We're going to look at e-com now. So one thing we can say, grocery transactions are break even for larger orders and a financial calamity for small orders if no variable shipping costs are covered. So when the consumer doesn't pay the shipping, e-commerce is really unprofitable. So let's look at that frame. This is pro forma now, a large order, and a large order is $100. So the average order in grocery, as we can look through household panel data, is about $25. So most consumers are making a quick trip, getting their, just a few items for their transactions. They have a couple big fill-up transactions that they do. Here's those variable costs that I talked about earlier. So we have variable operating profit that's actually fairly, healthy. But now just on the e-com, every order is at least $15 of delivery for a shipment and at least $6 or $7 on fulfillment. I'm giving a little bit of credit for efficiency and scale and making investments. You can see to Kroger and Amazon, but not all that much. They're still paying some significant dollars. And if you've ever bought, and I think probably the odds are very few of you have done big grocery orders online, at minimum, I'm being generous with this. I would argue that it's probably $30 or more. I just did one. It was like $110 and they had 4 separate deliveries. Even if it all came in one delivery, it'd be just a ton of boxes and corrugate and weight. I mean, and if you're saying that I have to deliver this in a day or two, those costs are going to be way more than $15, even if you have some kind of preferred rate. So this is a large order, and as we take all these costs out, then we're just at break even for these retailers. Here's Costco. Remember, their variable operating profit was always much lower, and these costs don't differ really by retailer, so they actually lose money even on large orders. So this explains why they have demurred from getting into e-commerce, because they understand how much money they're making. They know their supply chain and their profit model, and it just doesn't make sense for them to do that. They have almost no path to ever making money. Here's the average order, and as I mentioned, it's $25 per order. So we're still at that variable operating margin, but on each order then, on an average order, these retailers aren't making much. I mean, they're truly existing at the margin for most of their transactions, $3 or $4 per average order of grocery. The delivery, okay, I'll give you that it's a small order, may only have to come once, but the best rate I could find, and assuming again a 1 to 2 day delivery window, was $8. You'll never get that down more than $1 or $2. I mean, you still have human beings deliver. You still have to pack the order and fulfill it and put all the corrugate and all that. I mean, if you've ever done, and I'm actually in a very, high purchase e-com, not so much grocery, but I mean, just all the boxes and corrugate that you go through is, I mean, it's kind of the absolute opposite of sustainability is how much paper you burn through. So what's going on here is that the retailer is now having to pay for things that the consumer is providing for free, because the consumer in brick and mortar, they're the ones that go to the store and then come back with the goods. They're the ones that walk the shelves for, an hour for a big delivery and fill their baskets, and maybe somebody's there to bag it up, but essentially they're taking care of all the order fulfillment. Now that rests all on retailers. And the e-com retailers, they still are under the notion that they want to be price competitive. So they're not really making anything more on this end. I know there's a lot of stories out there how bad Amazon is grinding on vendors to pick up more of the load, but that can only go so far. I mean, Walmart's not going to allow that. And there's also something called Robinson-Patman that just makes it, legally untenable. You just don't want, that can't be a persistent way to do business in the US, is that Amazon would get dramatically better pricing. It doesn't make any sense on these small orders under any circumstance. And here's just some corroboration. So Supply Chain Dive, consultancy in supply chain, obviously, estimates Amazon, even after Amazon Prime partially subsidized, they lost $7.2 billion in shipping. That's across all products. And if you think about the concept of Prime, one of the ways they make money on Prime is the notion of slippage, that a lot of people that pay that $129 a year won't get enough orders to actually take that up. And the conundrum is that they want people to buy more. They want an incentive to, get more transactions, but that wipes out, and then they start losing money on the delivery, but they get more transactions. So which way do they want to play it? The slippage or the transactions? Certainly, if they need to achieve any scale, they need more transactions. So they would then, by definition, be losing a ton of money. But look at these horror shows of margins here, minus 30, minus 40. That means that every sale that e-commerce grocery makes, they lose money. The more they sell, the more they lose. So that's why the Kroger loss was so dramatic in e-commerce, because they are only grocery. All these other guys can offset it with some higher ticket general merchandise hardware type items. Kroger really doesn't have that opportunity, nor does any other e-commerce grocer. So we're back to Econ 101. It's not just theoretical. So let's just take a look. So here's the zone where I need to be profitable in the long and the short term. So here's my average cost. That's loaded in my variable cost, my fixed cost. I need to have a pricing that's here so that I know that I'm always going to make money. I've covered my fixed cost. I've covered my variable cost. In the short term, I can make money here. I can make on each transaction. I can actually make money, but that margin that I'm making just isn't enough to cover my fixed cost. That's basically where on a non-grocery e-com is right now. They are kind of breaking even, keeping their head above water, but not making a lot of money. In fact, making no money on a net basis, just on a gross margin basis. But here's where e-commerce grocery lies. Their pricing is down here. They're saying I have to be competitive with brick and mortar. Brick and mortar has an average variable cost structure, as we've just said, that's more like this. So they're actually, the price ranges here, their costs, their variable costs are much lower. They don't have the delivery. They don't have the fulfillment. E-commerce does. So for those of you that are currently, because I think there's some students listening in, always keep this, when you get to this in Econ 101, e-commerce grocery is the case study for those lessons. So it's a pretty grim picture. So can we ever get there? Is there any path to ever making money? No. The answer is no again. The financials will not get materially better. In fact, they will get materially worse. Because remember, the more we sell, the more we lose when we operate on a variable cost model, a variable operating profit. Scale really doesn't help because there's really no place in the supply chain, or very few places, to build in scalability. You know, you can do all the drones and the autonomous cars you want. It's extraordinarily expensive. It can't get you to scale, primarily because it just would take I mean, you figure there's at least 100 people going through a grocery store an hour. I mean, what can a car do? Maybe, what, 3 deliveries an hour? Maybe. I mean, you're never, ever, you know, or a drone. It's just not going to be viable. And you also have retailers fixated on the notion that A, they need to be price competitive, and B, that short delivery times are paramount. And they are, of course, very important, but they're not the only thing that's important. And so when I made the notion it will never be profitable, I did have the qualifier under the current operating model, the current business model, because the current business model clearly states that they need to be competitive and actually try and beat the brick and mortar, and that's just never going to happen. That let's say they then say, well, let's get off of that notion. Let's price up. Let's increase our, you know, prices. We'll make more money. We'll cover our variable costs. Well, then they accept lower buyer counts. Then tech investments surely will never work. They already have a low buyer count as as it is now. That 38% now goes to what, 25? The people that will buy regularly go from 17 to down to 10. That's clearly not the scale that they had envisioned. And all those tech investments just get scrapped and written off because you can't scale that small of a buyer base across the entire country. Well, one of the areas that has gotten a lot of attention is pickup because, hey, I don't have to deliver. I scrap that whole thing. So what about that? What if I convert more buyers to pickup? Denied. The hypothesis is denied. Let me just take a little side step here. And for those of you that are just starting out in your career, you aspire to managerial position. If you do ever achieve managerial position, the absolutely first thing you ever need to acquire is a good denied stamp. And I'm talking the old school denied stamp. You know, you want to be in a position some, newbie comes up asking for vacation or to come in late an hour. You want to just be able to whip that thing out and denied. So always just remember that. I mean, that's kind of one of the good pieces of advice I could always embed through this presentation. But why, is the hypothesis denied? Well, first of all, buyers prefer delivery over pickup. Pickup still has a long way to go. So to get more buyers on pickup, you're going to have to spend a ton of money to make that conversion. And there's no evidence that that groundswell is ever going to occur. Remember, only 6% of the people do it regularly. You also have this pickup infrastructure that requires just this massive investment of its own. And it's a big disruption. So what are you going to do? Carve out a bunch of your store to have a bunch of people picking orders? Are you going to what? Build another warehouse in the parking lot of your store so less people can park? And you don't have enough people using that format to justify that type of investment. And really the big thing is shoppers actually like shopping at their local grocery store. They make 40 trips a year. That doesn't sound like an experience where there's this overwhelming, resounding dissatisfaction. In fact, there are studies, KPMG puts out this study on consumer satisfaction for the major brands. And we're not just talking grocery brands, we're talking Nike, Apple, BMW, what are the most beloved brands? And these three retailers place top 10 among those. So, I mean, we have a very strong business model and strong brands now. And so it will always be difficult to carve out that and get a meaningful demand. And even if you do, then you have a supply chain that will always be unprofitable. And if you want proof that it's going to be really tough, just look at the low penetration now. So with that, I will leave it open to questions, kick it back to Robert, and let all the challenges and the people that I disrupted come at me.